evening and good to have you with us on the 9 p.m. edition of the Urban Debate. India, viewers, has slipped down the rankings on the Global Hunger Index to 102. On an index, we are 102nd country when it comes to hunger and malnourishment. This is a report that monitors the country's undernourished child population and has revealed embarrassing details of just how only 9.6% of India's children between 6 months and 23 months are fed a minimum acceptable diet. Can you imagine that? While poor children are malnourished, on one side, that's the biggest issue that a government must be facing on even now. Here is what's happening on the other side. The Food Corporation of India, FCI, its granaries are overflowing. They have too much grain and they don't know what to do. It's rotting, it's going to waste. So the FCI has actually written to the government saying, please do something. Export all of this surplus stock. Export all of this extra stock if you want, in the form of an aid to countries who need it. The third aspect, a reality also in our country. India wastes food worth 88,000 crore per year, which is roughly 244 crore worth of food per day that is wasted because we cannot save it, store it properly, or use it and consume it on time. So the question that I'm asking as I highlight these two different sides to you is India's food policy flawed? Is it right to connect the two and say, while children under the age of 5 are not getting any food, are going to bed hungry, are malnourished and dying of hunger, on the other hand, we have all of this food that's just rotting away, not just grains, not just pulses, but all kinds of food that's just getting wasted. Does it mean that our policy is completely flawed? Let's say good evening to our panelists. Gopal Agarwal, spokesperson for the BJP, Anjali Bharadwaj, member for Right to Food campaign and co-convener for NCPRI, Milind Murugkar, policy researcher of food security in agriculture, Yamini Iyer, president and chief executive for Center for Policy Research, Anupam, spokesperson for Swaraj India, and Mr. Chengal Reddy also joins us this evening, a farmers activist. Let me actually begin by going across to Anjali Bharadwaj on this because, and let's start, Anjali, with what this report shows. And we have dropped on this hunger index drastically just in the last 5 years. What is going wrong?
We've been saying this, Tanvi, for a very long time, that there is a grave crisis which needs to be addressed. And yes, what you've been mentioning about grain rotting on the one hand and people going hungry on the other is absolutely true in our country, unfortunately. We are in a situation where there is a National Food Security Act under which there's supposed to be food security guaranteed to the people of the country. Unfortunately, there are two problems with the law which needed to be improved upon as well. One was that there isn't universalization under the law. Now, let me tell you what the problem with that is. The problem is that the moment there is targeting in any system, and especially in a country where corruption is rife, immediately the most deserving people get left out of that security net. And we have been saying that the only way to make sure that nobody deserving is left out is to universalize. There is adequate amount of grain in the FCI. If there is political will, there can be universalization, and everybody should get grain as a right. If at all there has to be any exclusion, it should simply be very clear criteria, like somebody paying an income tax and they don't need certain support. But apart from that, everybody should be entitled to grain so that nobody has to go hungry. The other is the entitlement was fixed only at 5 kilograms per person, which is clearly inadequate in a month. So when the law was passed, we remember that Mr. Narendra Modi, who's now the Prime Minister of the country, came out and said this is not a food security law. He said this is a starvation law. We had hoped that when he came into power in 2014, his government would in fact increase that entitlement. There is possibility of increasing it to much more to make sure that people can lead a life of dignity. They and their children don't have to go to bed hungry. Unfortunately, in the last 5 years, we've seen no improvement, no increase in the quantity of food grains that are distributed under the National Food Security Act. There has been a consistent demand to give pulses, to give millets, to give other kinds of food grains which are nutritious, so that children and adults in the country can actually get nutritious food as well. There has been a demand to give eggs, to give milk to children under the midday meal scheme. That also has not been done so far. So there has been a clear lack of political will to fix the problem. In fact, we have seen that there have been many starvation deaths in the last 5.5 years. And unfortunately, instead of addressing the problems behind these starvation deaths, we simply see the governments coming out and saying, denying that these deaths ever happened. So there is an alarming situation, and I think what this hunger index is showing by the figure where we are at today at 102 out of 117 countries, we are amongst the worst performing countries in the world when it comes to making sure that people are taken care of, they are not going to bed hungry, and there is nutrition for everyone.
Correct. And I'm just wondering just what could be more important, and this is not just for the current government, but for successive governments, what could be more important than ensuring that children, at least under the age of 5, get their basic food, get their basic nourishment? For viewers who are just tuning in, let me tell you, we are 102nd on the World Hunger Index. This is a reflection of undernourishment. What they factor in is child wasting, basically to say that under the age of 5, children whose weight isn't what it should be at a certain height, whose weight isn't what it should be at their age. So this is basically a problem of us not feeding our children. And at a time where tons and tons of food is going waste in our country, where is the gap? Yamini Iyer, please explain, help us understand this. Where is the gap? How are we not able to use the food we have and give it to the children who need it?
Well, I think Anjali has given a very important prelude to the problem, which is that there has been a significant political neglect that needs to be rectified. But underlying that is also the fact that the political context and the economic context has resulted in a lot of mismanagement of the food distribution system. At one level, given the state of the economy, and over the last few years, the government has relied heavily on the Food Corporation of India for off-budget borrowing, which has created a present context where the FCI is currently in deep debt and has therefore limited means to be able to address the problem of distribution. Secondly, there is a larger issue around the capacity and capability of the FCI as it is structured now, and its ability to distribute food grains, and ensure that the supply chain from the FCI go down to the PDS system is effective and well in place. This is again something that is not new. there are numerous committee reports that have highlighted the problem. Various state governments have over time tried to innovate and reform the system, but it is a systemic problem that needs serious and urgent attention, and despite the Food Security Act, attention has not been paid to it in the way it should. I think it is also important to remember that the current crisis is taking place in the context of an economic slowdown. The government has finally woken up to the fact that the economic slowdown is real, but the economic slowdown is not something that came today. It's something that has been emerging over time, and we have now NSSO data to tell us that there has been a decline in consumption, and a decline in consumption in what is essentially a fragile economy, especially a fragile rural economy, is an indicator of an increase in poverty. If you have an increase in poverty, inevitably the most vulnerable citizens of this country suffer, and it is therefore imperative on the government, both at the center and at states, to be able to take corrective measures. Those have thus far not been taken. In fact, over the last few months, we've seen some correctives on the economy, but most of them have been focused on trying to boost private investment, on the corporate, on strengthening the animal spirits of the entrepreneurs, but the rural economy has been completely ignored, and this too needs to be addressed if we have to address this larger concern.
Okay, so let me highlight that.
And not least, this is a problem that is not just one of the union government, but one that states should take seriously too.
Okay, point well taken. Something that the states also need to look at, because a lot of these schemes are also state driven. In 2015, India's rank was 93. Since then, we fell to a rank of 103 in 2018 and now 102. So obviously something's gone drastically wrong in the last 4 years, where we've successfully fallen down this index and things have worsened. Mr. Gopal Agarwal, what is going wrong here? How is it that we have become a worse performer than what we were 5 years ago?
Definitely, this is an issue which we have to work on, and it's a important issue that the government has to look into. But some of the factors I have to understand that whenever there are index, they are relative to the what other countries have progressed. So in absolute terms also has to be seen, but still whatever may be the reason, these child nutrition and etc. have to be effectively tackled by the government. Government is working on some of the issues, but it definitely shows that we have to work more on it. What basically when Yamini ji told, I also have this discussions at many point of time, because in the federal structure what happens is the central government does not provide the last mile connectivity to the common man citizens of India. It is the state governments generally who are responsible for implementation of various schemes of the central government. Central government provides the funds and they have to implement. And there is definitely India is at many schemes facing implementational problems, because there in this report it says that the defecation, whatever open defecation, sanitation, it is worsened. I can't understand when there is such a big move, it may not have been completely effective. There may be loopholes as it is there in the bureaucracy or administration structure that the India is working on and inherited. But when there is such a big effort and there may be some numbers of failures, but still how we have not moved up in the sanitation, I can't understand. With 11 crore toilets, whatever you may call. But then poor housing, government is focusing, midday meal is there, Manrega we have increased schemes. There are, I think over the 5 years, many of the people were criticizing our government that we have become too pro-poor schemes are coming one after the another.
So I agree with you, Mr. Gopal Agarwal.
We don't economic side.
We may not
or
be
the
able to,
economic growth is
access
not
the
the
right
focus.
validated
But now
facts
the other side of
to
the
try and understand
conflict
what's
is
going
coming.
wrong. If you say that you've managed to build so many toilets, we don't know if they're all functional, if they are being used, which is why, on the sanitation aspect, you're not seeing the results in the report that you would like to.
However, numbers may be wrong, but still.
However, some of the policies maybe on paper may not have translated.
May be
We
wrong,
don't
but
know. I
still
agree
there
with you.
has to
We
be
don't know, but
improvement.
there are experts on this panel, so I'm going to ask them. I'm not going to second guess it. And let me come to the other aspect. BJP manifesto in 2019 on food security said that we have been successful in extending food security cover to over 80 crore people from poor and lower middle income families who are now receiving food grains at highly subsidized prices. They have then gone on to talk about this in detail. So what's going wrong, Mr. Milind Murukar? Is it that, while we may be giving grains to people, we're not giving them the right kind of food that is required for nourishment? So is the policy flawed at that level, or are we even failing to implement what is being shown on paper here?
Yeah, I think the issue, of course, is of implementation. But before that, Mr. Gopal Ji has been alluding to the fact that maybe the government emphasized on sanitation and other schemes which he talked about has not been captured over here for whatever reason. But I think more important is what probably we are missing out or ignoring is the disastrous impact that demonetization has had on rural economy. I'm sure because this is NSSO data has not come out, we have been waiting for that. But this certainly has had a big impact, and that would reflect in many ways. And that is now we look at the drop in consumption, and this is another aspect which is coming forward. But on other aspect, I mean, this was also point was made. It's ultimately the state capacities. And we know that certain states perform far better, like Tamil Nadu does extremely well, and Kerala does extremely well. Andhra Pradesh has improved a lot. So the question is why other states are not learning from their expertise, why they are not drawing from their expertise. What is so unique that can't be replicated? And here I think that it's the central government's responsibility to help the states to build their capacities, to facilitate this kind of learning across the states. And I think that is terribly missing. If you look at the debate which took place around just before when the food security law was passed, there was a large deliberation which involved participation of different NGOs working on the ground. And entire Food Security Act was in fact based on all the inputs and active participation of these NGOs. I think that participation we don't see. Even that debate on food security, which was very lively debate, that has been missing. I think now when we are facing this economic slowdown, we need to look at this also as a major structural problem. So now we are agreeing that it's not just cyclical, it's a structural problem. And one of the major thing is our human capital. We cannot break this impasse unless we do something concrete on this development of human capital. And I think this is something should be taken as an opportunity, this economic slowdown. And our entire political discourse has to shift away from only giving, catering to the demands of corporates and supply side things. But we have to think what are the mechanisms to trigger the demand.
Okay.
And the political discourse has to shift on welfare schemes, and especially food security should be seen as a major a solution to this, addressing the structural problem of this slowdown.
Okay. Let me take that point across to Anupam. And Anupam, I'll come back to the initial point one more time, because it's very difficult to, wrap one's head around the fact that we have all of this food that's getting wasted on an annual basis. We are very well aware of the fact that we need to invest in a cold chain infrastructure and a policy to save this food. We have a Food Corporation of India that is writing to the External Affairs Ministry saying, please export this food because it's going waste. And on the other hand, we have people who are going to sleep hungry. Where is the disconnect? Again, I'm asking, is it even possible to connect the two, or are two very different things completely?
So Tanvi, they are not two very different things completely. There is of course a serious lack of mismanagement, and there is a serious lack of accountability in implementation. I guess Yamini and Anjali highlighted the aspect of food grain distribution quite well in the beginning. But apart from that, apart from the fact that there is a very sad and pathetic state of affairs, this reflects the hunger index reflects a very sad and pathetic state of affairs of our public welfare system. It also reflects the misplaced priorities of this government. We cannot look at this hunger index in isolation. What I mean to say is that when we at the very juncture when we are discussing this hunger index performance of the country, we also have reports of extreme concentration of wealth in the hands of few, resulting in extreme inequality. We had this recent report by Oxfam which says that India is at the bottom 10 among 157 countries. We have seen the NSSO data. There is this NSSO data with us which says that over half of the labor force is now, half of the population is out of the labor force, and over 3 crores of over 3 crores of rural jobs have been lost in the last 5 to 6 years. So these are all reflection of the serious inequality in our economy, and it also reflects the misplaced priorities. Let me come to the point which was mentioned slightly by one of the panelists about the scenario which we are in at this moment. There is a serious crisis of economic slowdown. Right. And at the very point when, in order to address this crisis, what the government could have done was to ensure some cash infusion in the economy, ensure some cash infusion in rural economy, right, to ensure that there is some sustained income with the masses. At such a point, what the government actually did was that it handed over 1.45 crores to some of the top corporates. I would not say not even all the corporates or the business houses are flourishing. Some of the top corporates got benefited from those 1.45 crores through way of tax rate cut at a point when this money could have been used in a different way to address the economy. So there is a very, very serious lack of understanding at one level. There is serious lack of sensitivity, and there is also lack of competency in this government. I say this with utmost responsibility. There is serious lack of competency also with this government when it comes to addressing issues of economy, when it comes to addressing issues of poverty alleviation, when it comes to addressing issues concerning public welfare.
Okay, all right. Point well taken, Mr. Chengal Reddy. Thank you for patiently waiting. You've heard our experts out. Is there a specific point to start as a solution for what we are looking at, this flawed food policy? The food is available, but it's not going to the right people. We're in the middle of the slowdown. You know, the purchase power is becoming worse for people in urban and rural areas. It's going to only get worse from here on otherwise.
You must understand that this whole problem revolves around agriculture, farmers, people of SCs, BCs, migrants and all that. See, what has happened since in the last 5 years of Mr. Modi's government. See, firstly, in 2015, he refused to give MSP to the farmers. This was declared in Supreme Court. In 2016, Mr. Modi directed Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh government not to give bonus on agriculture procured by FCI and others, wheat and rice. And in 2000, subsequently came this demonetization. Why I am trying to explain is, if you see the so-called malnutrition problems and all that, basically almost 90% of the tribals and around 80-85% of the scheduled castes and 70% of the backward classes spread across the country in diversified field, but 90% of them in agriculture and animal husbandry related issues. But primarily what is happening in the last 5 years of Mr. Modi's government is, none of the agriculture produce was economical. See, deliberately for various reasons, whatever it is, no agriculture produce got profitable in the past 5 years of Mr. Modi. Deliberately, the government of India, they tried to put the farmers' prices down. But at the same time, if you look at the so-called index and all that, the consequence of slowdown of agriculture and the debacle in the farmers, see, the year that Mr. Modi announced the demonetization, in 1 year, we farmers lost 3 lakhs crores of rupees. You must understand that 90% of the farmers are their agriculture labor. They also do the marketing. So their income matters a great deal. And it was all in cash transaction. But thanks to Mr. Modi, for almost 6 months to 1 year, the whole thing collapsed and it is still continuing. Now the problem here is, yes, as somebody said, yes, public distribution system is hopeless, food corporation, corruption, and these things are going on. But one thing we must understand here, why is that in this country, when the best technologies have come into industry and other sectors, why is that agriculture technologies haven't come? Look at, let me tell you, nutrition part of it. Why is that we are not able to produce a better quality of various agriculture produce that the technologies have shown? And the so-called public distribution system, which is there for the last 60, 70 years,
Correct.
Mr. Modi could not make one single change of bringing pulses under PDS, oil seeds under pulses, and maybe supporting these poor boys in the hostels, government hostels and schools by having a cup of milk.
Okay. So let me take that point. Let me take that point back to Gopal Agarwal.
Friends have agreed. The government of
Right. Let me take that point to Gopal Agarwal. Mr. Agarwal, there seems to be some sort of agreement between, our panelists that the government kind of took its eye away from the ball. You've not focused on this issue. You have a PDS system that was ready. There was food security policy that was there. All you had to do was build on it. You've digitized records. You said you're going to improve the distribution system. Then why is it that we are still staring at this possibility where people are not getting the food that they need to?
Tanvi, I told you there are some issues that we have to consider and in our debate. I'm not saying that it is not a serious issue and we are not appraised of the situation. We are accepting that the government has to do more on the issue. But still, in the debate, we have to understand that there is here also someone talking about economic development, why we are not going out for resource allocation and distribution of the resources to the people. Ultimately, you have to also understand that every sector is asking for some benefits, some leverages or a support system. The government has limitation on the resources, one thing. Second thing is, I can't understand, as I said in the sanitation, when we have increased allocation of every scheme, including Manrega or midday meal or everything, there are other schemes for the poor, gas allocation, subsidy, we have not reduced anything. Still, how our parameters can have fallen. So absolutely, those parameters have not fallen. Relatively, some of the countries like Bangladesh and some of the countries.
Even if we leave that, okay, Mr. Gopal Agarwal, okay, but we can have the debate about the credibility or the factors that are being used in this report or not. Even if I leave that, apart.
No, I'm not asking for credibility.
Okay. Even if I leave that aside, as per the National Family Health Survey, 35.7% children below the age of 5 years were underweight. And year after year, that's the kind of data we are looking at.
I have patiently heard you.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Tanvi, let me finish first. The issue is, second, I told you that states are responsible for last mile connectivity. And the last point that I want to tell you is, the government, 93% of our labor force was working in the informal sector. Those who are criticizing demonetization, GST and other reforms, they should understand that NSSO data itself tells us that large population has shifted from informal to formal. Even for the informal labor force, we have provided for PF, ESI, Ayushman Yojana. So there may be a time gap where the schemes are implemented, that impact has come into. But how can, when 50 lakh people have already benefited out of Ayushman, there was no Ayushman earlier, now there is Ayushman. So can we call it's a complete failure? It has to be closed. So we have to understand that this indexing, etc., they have certain limitations of survey and relative growth. So these issues, but they are definitely a small alert that the government is working. I am very much sure that we are concerned for the poor and our basic objective is upliftment of poor. But there is a concentration of wealth which the country is suffering for 70 years. 58% of our total
Okay, but
wealth
we
is
can't.
accumulated
Yes,
to 1%
yes,
of
but
total
we
wealth.
are
And
falling
do not
further on
now.
the hunger
Mr. Agarwal,
index.
please
From-
don't
No,
deviate.
Mr. Gopal Agarwal, let's not
please,
talk
I want
about
to
the
avoid this.
last
See,
70 years
you
as an
must
excuse,
understand.
please.
No,
This
Yeah.
report
Can I
is
come
a
in?
clear indication that
ask
we
him
have
not to
fallen further
divert
on
the
the
subject.
hunger index.
Please ask him some
Data
basic
suggests
things.
that the statistics even for
Please
malnourishment and
ask him
undernourishment for
fundamentally,
children has
why is that
worsened.
employees and industry want any relief today? If any facilities has to be given, it is to the rural areas, it is to agriculture,
absolute
it is to the
figures
for
is
farm
not
labor, that
fallen.
facilities has to be given. This government is
Tanvi?
giving to income
Yes.
tax benefits and employee salaries. What business have you got to appoint 7th pay commission or go on giving this tax exemption to industrialists and businessmen? You see, it is proved that just 1% of Indians,
Because
they
Mr.
control
Chengal Reddy,
70% of wealth.
because
And
Mr.
even
Chengal
in spite
Reddy,
of that, knowing everything, your
malnourishment
government, Mr. Modi's government is
and
going
little
day
chil-
after
Can I come
day
in?
on giving
malnourishment,
concession to these employees and
malnourishment,
so-called
Mr. Chengal
organizations.
Reddy,
You want,
and
Mr.
little
Reddy,
children
Tanvi?
going,
Yes,
you
madam,
want
to sleep
economic
hungry
development
or little
and
children
not
dying of
support the
hunger
reforms is
is
not
not really a
possible.
poll agenda. It doesn't
What?
translate into votes at any point of time up.
When the
Contradictory
economic
to
development
what
of
Mr.
growth
Reddy
will
are the
not
other
come,
steps you are
where
talking
will the
about.
resources
That's not
come?
just BJP's
Tanvi, can I
fault.
come in?
That would have been any party which would have been in power right now.
Tanvi?
Yamini Iyer wants to make a point. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to make 3 points. Number one, on the question of relative versus how India is performing. I think it's important to, rather than say India's performance is relative to what other countries are doing, other countries have done better. This is absolutely right, but we should also be asking ourselves, why have other countries done better? The fact that many countries in our neighborhood have done better than us, and consistently, it has nothing to do with this government or previous governments. Consistently for the last 25 years, Bangladesh, which until recently had a lower GDP than India, has performed far better on basic human capital indices than India ever has. This is a systemic, deeper problem about the pathways of development that India is choosing that we need to reflect on. But more importantly, to the puzzle that you've been trying to unpack, how is it that India has this surplus of food grain and a poor performance on something like a global hunger index, combined with the puzzle that Mr. Agarwal has been talking about, which is about all the new schemes that the government has put in place, which is not apparently being reflected in the index. I would say 2 things. Firstly, the index is not just about pure hunger. The index, as you rightly said in the beginning, is based on malnutrition, stunting, child mortality, and this links back to a multiple set of factors that contribute to poverty, right? So it has to do with the quality of healthcare, it has to do with the quality of sanitation, it has to do with the quality of nutrition, and it has to do with the quality of our nutrition schemes. So it's not just about grains, that's one part of the story, but it is about this larger gamut. Now, in a world of limited resources, all governments, even in a world where you have a growth path and you're growing at 7, 12, 15, 12%, whatever that may be, resources are limited. And the decision of allocation of resources and prioritization of those resources has to be made on the back of evidence and on the back of what is needed for the economy at a particular point in time. Now, the one thing that Mr. Agarwal, your government has been particularly weak on is on actually looking at the evidence, staring at the evidence, putting that evidence out in the public domain, and then making the rational choices. It may be worth asking, is it sensible, given the state of the economy and the needs on the ground, to be focusing on a program that is providing insurance in tertiary care, potentially at the cost of building a stronger primary healthcare structure? Is it sensible at this point in time to be focusing on what all of these are priorities? These are perfectly important things to do. But if we have a system where our nutritional needs have not yet been met, and the quality of implementation of our ICDS system and other nutritional programs is weak, should that be priority, or should something else be priority? So I think this is a call for the central government and for state governments to look at the whole process of prioritization of resources, and then make a commitment to strengthening the architecture of delivery and ensure that things reach the last mile. Lastly, somebody talked about demonetization, very important, but equally important, the entire system in just one last point, has been going through multiple transitions, direct benefit transfers, using of Aadhaar. All these disruptions have also created exclusions that are affecting the most vulnerable. Some system has to be put in place to address that. This is the slippage in these indices is a reflection of these disruptions which are affecting the most vulnerable, linked to an economy that is slowing going down, creating the perfect storm for where we are today.
I completely take your point, and you know what's even more important is
Madam,
what you highlighted, that in the current scenario things could simply get worse because of the environment we are staring at, because of some of the policies or reforms that were brought in. Mr. Reddy, I'll come back to you in just a minute, and I need to go to Anjali Bharadwaj as well. But very quickly, one point that we need to highlight, and I have Sanjana who's joining us from the newsroom on this. Sanjana, BJP promised us in 2014 a lot to do about, fixing the supply chain so that food wastage is reduced. Food wastage is a huge concern in our country. They came back and made a lot more promises in 2019. Can you just take us through some of what is there on their agenda, so then we can go back and have a conversation about how to not waste so much food?
Absolutely, Tanvi. Let me just take you through what exactly some of the promises were. The first, of course, was to have warehouse networks across the country to ensure better storage, to ensure better facilities. Let's remember that the networking has been a major issue. The next is to have national warehousing grids along the national highways. Let's understand that this would actually help in connection because of the connectivity with highways and with regards to the storage and supply being brought in. After that was to, of course, ensure necessary logistical linkages for these warehousing. Let's remember this is also another issue that perhaps needed to be looked into with regards to having a connectivity, and then have village storage schemes for agri-produce. Because what happens is that, these grains are close to these villages, they're close to the fields. Sometimes in transportation, that becomes a problem. Lastly, enable farmers to store these agri-produce near their villages, which would actually help these farmers as opposed to them getting stuck in transportation bottlenecks or loopholes that we may actually see. Then is bringing 1 crore hectare of agricultural land under micro irrigation. This is also something that the BJP said that they would look into very closely. So these are some of the poll promises that the BJP made with regards to storage, with regards to food grain storage in the country, but remains to be seen how many of these, Tanvi, are being executed and, more importantly, actually followed and being beneficial for the country.
These are the ones that they made to promised us in May 2019. A lot of what was also promised in before that in 2014 hasn't also been achieved yet. Sanjana, thanks for really putting that in perspective, and I want to take that point across to Anupam before I go across to Anjali Bharadwaj. Anupam, the fact of the matter is a lot has to be done in our country to save this food. Before, so one aspect is getting the food that we have to people who deserve it and who need it. The other is to save the food that's being dumped, that is rotting, simply sitting in our warehouses, not making it to the market on time.
Right, of course, this is a problem, and as Malini mentioned earlier, there is a serious problem regarding prioritization of welfare schemes and allocation of resources. But the problem with this government is that prioritization of welfare schemes or allocation of resources is a secondary thing. The problem with this government is that they have not prioritized jobs, economy, poverty, hunger issues, such like of those. The subcategorization of the larger concern comes at a later stage. The problem with this government is all the focus, all the political focus of this establishment is on issues which in some way or the other can divide the society, on issues which can actually play a role in covering, in putting a cover on these real issues. There is, of course, a problem with the complete supply chain system to the storage, to implementation, to every such aspect of, but that's a secondary thing. And this, when I talk of divisive issues, we have often heard the BJP and leaders from the ruling party preaching Pakistan to fight against poverty, hunger, malnutrition, and not fight against India, which is very true. But when you see the data coming from this World Hunger, Global Hunger Index, we see that Pakistan in the last 4 years has actually surpassed India. 4 years ago, Pakistan was ranked somewhere around 110, I guess, and India was better off. Today, Pakistan is better off in comparison to India. So if at all there is some amount of jingoism concerned with Pakistan, we should at least try to be better among our neighbors at least.
Okay, point taken. I know Gopal Agarwal, you want to respond.
On issues of poverty alleviation.
But Chengal Reddy also wants to make a point, which I'm sure also you will need to respond to. So, Mr. Reddy, go ahead, please, and then Gopal can respond. Yes.
No, but you
point by point, you will have to respond to both of them. Yes, Chengal Reddy first.
Yeah. No, please hear me. Yeah. See, the first and foremost thing that everyone in this country must understand is, today this country is divided into two sectors. One is organized sector, the other is unorganized sector. I would like to ask the government, whether it is the BJP or Congress, any one of these people, where is the need for you to increase salaries for government employees? Where is the need for you to increase the labor charges for public sector employees or any sector employees? Why should you give taxes exemption to this industrialist and businessmen? Tell me, it is the farm sector that you have neglected for 30 to 40 years. The entire problem is in agriculture. Today, if only Mr. Modi has invested sufficient amount on irrigation, technology and mechanization, today there is no question of any unemployment in this country. Now, unfortunately, I don't know much of politics of this BJP. We used to call them, I don't want to name it. See, he has miserably failed. He can't even understand the basics of agriculture. Mr. Modi goes on thinking of, international this and that. I don't want to comment, but what the BJP government must once again understand is, you can't keep people on false promises. Please understand, the entire crisis of Indian is the agriculture economy. If you increase productivity, if you increase the cost of, better price to farmers, your entire economy, your industry, service sector, every damn thing will improve.
So one aspect is obviously what you're giving to the farmers, Mr. Chengal Reddy. The other aspect is, when you procure from the farmers, what do you do with the food? What do you do with the food that you've procured from the farmers that then sits in your warehouses, if it makes it there, and then starts rotting before it makes it to the market, or makes it to the poor and the and the underprivileged who need that food? It's the entire chain that a government has to look at. Mr. Gopal Agarwal, please tell us, what parts have you fixed and what is next on your priority?
Tanvi, there are two lines that two panelists have taken. And if you are going to give me time, then only I can answer. The first thing,
go ahead, please.
When earlier panelists started talking, he was completely trying to derail the debate and started grinding his political axis. The issue when he is talking, how it is related with nationalism, how it is the issue of hunger is related to what we are doing with Pakistan, how Kashmir issue is being tackled, how 370 we have done globally, what we have done. So this kind of debate has no relevance in this. When you are talking on a hunger index, and when you are talking for benefit of the poor, there are two aspects on the debate. One is, what are the government schemes for the poor? Are they effective or not? Are the schemes correct or not? What is the last mile connectivity that they are establishing? Those issues you are discussing, we are answering them. So this is the one thing. Second thing is, Mr. Chengal Reddy is earlier also he was saying that why are you giving a tax benefit of 1,45,000? So if at one point of time you are saying economic growth has to take place, without economic growth how the government will have resources, then you said don't go for economic growth, you only work for the poor. So all these issues are not exclusion to one another. Economic growth is also important. Then welfare of the poor is important. National pride and nationalism is also very important.
National pride and nationalism is not going to get us anywhere, Mr. Gopal Agarwal, when 80% of our children in this country under the age of 5 are undernourished, are not even getting a basic diet. What good is this national pride about how Mahan my Desh is and talking about this when you can't even feed the children who are under the age of 5 in our country?
When I am telling you that the national pride will give you food, you just completely start.
Then don't tell me national pride is important when I am talking to you about food.
When I have told you that national...
What good is you wasting all this effort and energy into national pride and patriotism and lecturing us about it when you can't even do the basics? Only 61% of children, adolescents and mothers consume dairy products at least once a week.
How can you tell the Kashmir is a waste of energy? How do you tell when our soldiers are being killed and you are saying it's a waste of energy?
You see,
Kashmir is an important part of a
food to
country.
the poor people. What the hell are you talking of caste?
So you are bringing.
Okay, I'm getting derailed here, and that's not my conversation. Kashmir is not what we're sitting and debating here. Quick comment here from Anjali Bharadwaj, who's been wanting to make a point. Anjali Bharadwaj, a lot of the data that can I please just say a few words here. Mr. Gopal Agarwal, calm down, please. Continue with your focus on Kashmir. The only point that is being made here is that you cannot
hold of certain data and then you start grinding your axes. Okay. You work
Mr.
with
Gopal
a political
Agarwal,
agenda.
take a deep
you
breath,
get hold of
down.
some problem, then you work
This is not a national pride patriotism debate. You don't have to yell so much here. Gopal Agarwal, simply the point is, as much importance as you give to issues like Kashmir and Article 370, which is totally your prerogative, please don't forget the fact that thousands of children in our country today need your attention as well. Anjali Bharadwaj wanted to make a point, please. Let's just go across to her. I don't have time for this. Yes, Ms. Bharadwaj, I'm sorry I made you wait. Go ahead, please.
No. What I wanted to say was that we don't have to look outside the country. Like somebody already mentioned, there are any number of states within the country which have performed very well in terms of making sure that people have food security. Tamil Nadu, Kerala, there are many states where this has happened in the past and is happening where we could learn from. And I think that really the question comes down to the matter of political will. If there is a government, and I'm talking about any government, I'm not talking about any political party here, any government,
correct,
if it decides that it wants to ensure food security for its people, given the technology available today, given the advances that we have made, given the fact that there is so much surplus food that is lying, it is not impossible to do so at all. What we need is political will. Let me say here, for example, when we are talking about technology, we've already heard of various technologies that could be used to ensure food security. There could be MISs that could be used to enhance transparency. There could be on the procurement side, there could be technological advances. Instead, what the government focused on was Aadhaar, where we saw that when the government brought in those point of sale devices in the name of fighting corruption, what it ended up doing was excluding very, very vulnerable people from the food security net. It led to starvation deaths. 11-year-old Santoshi died in Jharkhand because her family was being denied their ration. They had a ration card, they couldn't get it because of Aadhaar.
Yeah,
similarly, there have been any number of cases that have come from other parts of the country as well.
I take the point
so
that
the
you're
wrong
making, Anjali
kind
Bharadwaj.
of technological fixes.
Sometimes you also have to keep in mind that there are overzealous officials on ground who pick up one part of the government policy and implement in a way that where it becomes more detrimental than it is beneficial. And the point that Anjali Bharadwaj is making was perhaps an example of that. Irrespective, we cannot ignore the fact that we are 102nd on a global hunger index. We cannot ignore the fact that millions of children in our country are undernourished, are not even getting the basic food, the basic diet that is essential for a decent growth. They're stunted in their growth because we're not able to feed them properly. How can this not be one of the biggest focus areas for our government? I leave that thought with you, and of course hope that the government takes note of what has just been presented. Thank you so much for joining us in the first conversation at the 9 p.m. Urban Debate. We move on to the other big story, and that is the Ayodhya title case. Finally, the verdict has been reserved today. In less than a month, we are expecting to hear on it. What does it mean? What are we looking at? We're going to get you a detailed explainer in just 30 seconds. Stay with us on Urban Debate.